This is a coping mechanism podcast.
This is a coping mechanism podcast.
Look, this is
This is a coping mechanism podcast.
Okay, hi.
Hello, one and all, to another exciting episode of This is a Coping Mechanism podcast. I am one of your hosts, Ted Henderson, along with my wonderful co-host,
Bessie. Join us in how we cope with things with this satire life with movies, media, mysteries.
and today we'll be doing media. On today's episode, we'll be talking about our experiences with religion, as well as the only first season of Handmaid's Tale. So,
Yes.
minor spoiler warning of a show that came
For
out.
sure.
Uh,
It's also a book, so
Yeah.
I mean...
I did research that, so that's
Yeah.
whenever I was doing research, I had never heard of this show, and then
Yeah.
I learned that it was a very old book, a lot older than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Um,
That's why it was scary when they made this show, because it felt like...
it was a lot realer.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, oh, this is like this dystopian world, and now it's like, nah, this kind of feels like it could happen.
Yeah.
Or like a
it's
lot of people don't watch it that know about it because it's triggering of what could come or what people have been through with religion, abuse, and I just eat that shit up. So I was like, give me it all.
It was definitely a messed up show, which,
For sure.
depending on your perspective, I know we had messaged this while I was watching it, where I was like, I don't know. I imagine if you are a woman or a mother, this show hits like a ton of bricks and just
Exactly.
knock you out. And that's whenever you were like, yeah, some people can't watch it. And
No, I know some women that have tried to watch it and just kind of like, I can't. Like, this is way too much. It's too scary. It's too triggering. It's too real. Like, I can't mentally encase in this show without it being like affecting my life.
or, yeah, I could see that. It was,
I mean,
but-
there's not really been like a show or movie, I feel like, that I've seen that like embarked all of what is happening in this from like the book. I think is pretty spot on for like the whole first season at least.
yes. So I did. So first off, hi. Like I said, I'm Ted. That's Bessie. How you been, Bessie? It's been a while. You know,
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. We haven't gotten together.
In a few weeks.
Yeah, in a few weeks.
Yeah.
So, first session back won't make any difference to you guys watching or listening.
Yes.
I want to thank you all. But I remember whenever I was looking it up, and I was researching the book, and after I found out it was a book while I was watching the show, and I was amazed at how it was like every point in the book they were hitting, it seemed, shot for shot
Yeah.
in the show. And I was like, oh, I bet this season is going to end exactly how this book is supposed to end. And then it does.
Right.
And then that's right before we started recording. Bessie asked me, like, are you going to watch like the rest of the show? And I was like, oh, you mean the other... I was amazed that they got...
I think there's five seasons?
Yeah, and then they're doing another one
yeah.
right now. And I was like... Or whenever I saw that...
Like how many seasons there were.
Yeah, how many seasons there are and how, like... So I watched this all in one day.
Yes.
It's been...
It's heavy.
Yeah, which...
So thank you for going in and watching it.
And I was like, I thought to myself, I don't want to do this. Again, this was an interesting show, but I watched the first episode of the second season, and it was immediately so, in my not as good and made less sense than because...
I mean, as it keeps going, there are, I feel like, a lot of filler episodes, and you're kind of like, oh, a lot of shit didn't happen, or it's a lot of, like, this back and forth of, like, the rebellion kind of fighting and people trying to get out. But I am at a point myself that I'm like, okay, I do kind of just want this series to end.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need much more. I just kind of tie it up. But I think there's even, like, talk of a spin-off show called, like, The Old Testament or something that's supposed to be just mainly all about the Gilead bring-up side of it. So instead of our perspective of, like, Alfred and all that stuff.
And the oppression
yes,
side
it's
of
gonna
it
be
more.
the build-up and that side of it, which again I would watch.
I
still,
like some of those bits in the first season.
Just I want to know more,
about like how this society seemed to have come into being.
Yeah, and take over.
It bothered me. This is this is actually jumping ahead into later in the season. I have my notes here throughout for each episode, but later on in the show, and this has nothing to do with the religious side of the show, which is what most of my notes are about. But this is why I'm not going to watch any more of it. Is the diplomat from Mexico comes, and that's a whole big part, and they're basically like trying to set up a trade agreement.
Yeah.
And then you find out later that the trade agreement is for fertile
Women.
potentially for these fertile women, for the handmaids. And then the second season opens with, there's this active, we'll get into it later because that actually does go more into the religious side of things, so I won't touch on it right now. But they're going to do a mass hanging of all the handmaidens, and they're leading him in, and then as soon as they show like the gallows in the season premiere of season 2, I was like, no, this is dumb. This makes no sense. Like, even for what they're trying to say, I know that this society that is like so flushed out and like so perfectly realized in the first season would never in a million years, their most precious and like commodity, which is messed up, but in the context of the show, of the story, they're just gonna wipe out like a good.
Did you watch after that?
Yeah, where it's fake.
It's fake. Okay.
Yeah.
I at least wanted you to go into the rest knowing that didn't happen.
Yeah, I know it did.
It was just like a scare tactic to like, don't rebel against this. This is just the fucking way it is.
Exactly. But then they do that, and I'm like, that is not what they've set up this society to be.
But to me, that shows more of the like, oh fuck. In any type of society like that, there's gonna be rebellion, and I think they feel threatened by it.
Yeah, this thing is like, they're saying that I think it's what they're trying to say is, in the context of the story, they're impressing upon like fear.
Yes.
And saying, do not rebel. This is not what you should. If you do this, bad stuff's going to happen. Yeah. As a viewer, all it says is, you have like, they showed way more horrifying stuff before with people who like, I can't remember her character's name. Ingrid? Where she's a lesbian. She kills the guy, steals the car, does all this stuff, and
gets sent to the colony.
No, she doesn't get sent to the colonies.
At one point she does.
Oh, she does later? Okay, so like they kill her lover.
Yes.
And then they surgically remove her clitoris, which was horrifying. When I was like, because they don't actually say that, but she wakes up like bandaged, and then the way the mother or the auntie,
the aunt,
describes
Aunt Lydia.
Aunt Lydia describes like, we took away, so now there'll be no reason to, no pleasure, no temptation.
You won't have that temptation.
I was like, what the.
Yeah.
Back to my first note on this show. You guys can't see it because it's a white paper in the way of, but my first note under Handmaid's Tale is, what the fuck? Because, which really encompasses this show. My point is that
it's wild.
She's gonna do all that.
Yeah.
And then they're gonna be like, okay, you're still so valuable that it's messed up, but you're going back out. And you're going back.
We need you.
Yeah, we need you. So after seeing that, and then them kind of, it felt like a fall.
For sure.
So I was like, I don't need to see any more of this. The creator of this book, the writer, perfect story.
It was good.
It was very disturbing and real, and now much more real, kind of realized, but I don't need to see any more.
Yeah. Well, as I watch them, I'll just let you know. But so for anyone who hasn't really seen this or needs like a freshen up, Handmaid's Tale, the Republic of Gilead, is this kind of world where this super like Unitarian Christian totalitarian oligarchic dictatorship type of like religion group take over
America.
the US government, and come in guns a-blazing with, this is how shit's rolling now, and you don't have a fucking choice. But they slowly, I don't remember exactly if in the first seasons with, why don't I remember? I don't want to call her Offred because that's not her name.
I have her real name written down somewhere.
I know her daughter's name, Hannah. June.
Yeah, June. That's
yeah,
right.
So
I don't, because
you
learned it in the second episode.
Do they show they show flashbacks throughout the whole show?
So
but you get to see how like they show this kind of like group already in pushing the government with like, oh, you want to be on birth control, your husband has to sign for it. Oh, and then it's like, oh, actually, you guys can't work anymore as women. So they slowly strip those things, which I think is also like with the whole birth control thing feels so real now because that is a thing.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, at least they're giving us that buildup of like, everyone thought like, fuck, they're taking all this shit away, but like it won't be overthrown. And then we're thrown into it being overthrown.
Yeah, it's like we know where we are, but they do a really good job of, at least in the first, from what I watched of the first season, of going, okay, this is how things kind of. We don't know how it got there.
Yeah.
We do know that there was this society, this like chapters of this religion that is Christian.
It's very strict Christian of like the Old and New Testament from what I was reading on it.
But they do
like whatever works for them, they're picking and choosing.
They do abolish all other forms of Christianity.
Yeah.
We see that in the first episode where they're dismantling a Catholic church, and how it's a very passing thing that I thought was fascinating. How it's not just Christianity that they're going, okay, everything else, it's their form of Christianity. Or nothing. Which, again, is kind of sad. It's very sad, but that echoes kind of what things are now, where it's not. It's like, what kind of Christian are you?
Yeah.
What kind of. What God is your God? And if it better line up real, or otherwise we're gonna have some problems.
And they have this very like traditional, if you're not watching this, air quote, traditional values that they like really stick to, of like, women cannot read and write. You will not be even taught that as a kid who's born into this society. You like, it's almost like an eye for an eye. Like, oh, you're caught writing, we take your fucking hand. So it's very old school.
Yeah, it's
strict.
Old Testament, and it's
even with their punishments, like the public punishment of stoning, public shootings, hangings, having them hang by the wall so you could see like who was labeled whatever, and you're just like, oh fuck,
And it was I forget the commander's wife, I forget
Serena.
her name, but I know her real name is Yvonne Stravotsky, who is a character in a show I loved when I was a kid called Chuck.
Okay.
Which is a very fun show about a Geek Squad employee who gets a supercomputer spy in his brain, and she's one of his spy handlers, and it's just this goofy guy who has to go do spy stuff while he works for Geeks. It's a very goofy show.
So this was like seeing her again, and this you're like, oh, this is 360.
Yeah, I was amazed at how incredible her acting was in this show.
And I don't know if it touched in the first season as much, but she actually was the one, like in the flashbacks you see, like helped write this book.
That's what I was amazed, is that she helps write the laws. She was pretty much was one of the founding members of this government.
Exactly.
But it was all predicated on how she wanted women to stay home and
have babies.
Yeah,
I think the whole world in general was like I don't want to say sterile, but there was like a decline in birth rates.
Yeah,
kids actually surviving being born. So she was like, it's because all this pollution and we need cleaner food, and so that's why this world was created. Even though it stripped her of then everything she's ever done.
That was something in the beginning that I didn't understand until I got later in the show. I didn't really. Maybe they explained it and I just didn't pay attention, but I didn't know what caused the world to get to a point to where this was necessary, and then they're like, oh, birth rates had dropped so. It's not until I think the first flashback where June has her daughter.
Yeah.
That someone tries to take her daughter, and then I was like, oh, the birth rates are so bad worldwide that the population decrease is it's so bad that it's scaring the world.
Which is why that Mexican leader came and was like, even though this is terrible, we also need babies, so we're gonna take you.
She has this very where June like tells the truth, because she lies up to that point and is like, no, I'm an honored person, and I'm fine. And then she goes, look, that sucks, but not a single baby has been born alive in the city where I'm from for the past like 5 years.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh. And then you see that more, that's how this society has like garnered powers. They were the first person to go, okay, every person we find, we need to collect this.
Yes.
And
so, as a handmaid, you are only valued as
a reproductive organ.
Yeah. So it's like a handmaid is a woman who's
they can still have children.
Yeah,
and then
like
they're
blanking on the word.
They can still reproduce,
but they're still
fertile.
They're fertile. Sorry, that's the word I need. They're
so,
still fertile, but they were deemed sinful in some way that's why they're a handmaid. So it shows.
Oh, okay. I didn't get that. I thought it was anytime if you're fertile, you gotta go be a handmaid.
So it shows later on, outside of what we see with like the commanders in their houses, and those handmaids are like communities and like housing units of people who they deemed okay enough, so they were like legally married and went to church enough for them to be like
the normal people.
So they're like, we'll give you a chance to live this life under our rules because you kind of did it right before all this. So it shows some of that, and that's when you're like, oh, so like maybe if she was actually legally married to her husband, they wouldn't have been taken away. But since they weren't, they were living in like sin, so that's why she was taken.
Okay.
So they show more of that later on, of like all these other people. You're like, oh, so this is what happens to the rest of them.
That would be an interesting thing to see, because the whole context of the show is pretty much it's either flashbacks or in this gated community of high-ranking officials.
Right.
So you're like, okay, I don't. But that's neat to get an insight on how the rest of the society is working.
God damn, girl.
Right, you're trying to stretch out.
But yeah, so you do get some of that, but it's still like those people still live in this like fear if they fuck up.
Our video audiences is getting a special treat of seeing Alora passed out and splayed out on our podcast couch. Our audio listeners may have picked up that incredible snore.
But yeah, so that's why like there's like commanders, wives, but then like some of the Marthas and the aunts, they picked those people based on like what their lifestyle was like. So if you were a Martha, you maybe like were a widow, or like you were good enough to not be a handmaid or like sent to the colonies, like what they do with anyone who rebels, homosexuals, anything of that sort, abortions. They don't believe in like the whole modern medicine, even though it does show you that they do have these like private doctors
that they still do stuff.
Yeah, because then even though it's put on women, there's a lot. It's really men that become a lot more sterile. So it's like
they mentioned
so it's
that.
like these wives aren't probably getting pregnant most of the time because of these older men, or like if society was that bad or pollution or whatever the fuck it was, like it wasn't just on the woman.
They talk about it in where Alfred has to go to the doctor, and the doctor is like, "Hey,
I can do this.
9 times out of 10, it's the man. I have done this before. If you want, I'll write a thing, 5 minutes, and go on. Otherwise, they're gonna kill you."
Yeah, and she says no.
Yeah, she's like, well, because she thinks everything's a trap and that they're.
Yeah, that's true too. I would too. I'd be like, no, you're fucking baiting me.
Yeah, because she just got her friend like taken away before, and as dealing with all this, and did season 1 you didn't see
she gets pregnant eventually, right?
Yes, that's how the show ends.
Ends with Nick.
Yeah, she gets.
Serena says, "Hey, you go impregnate her."
She sets that up,
Yeah.
which is in the book.
Yeah.
And then, the commander, Yvonne's character, who I can't remember her name. Serena. Yeah, thank you. Serena finds out that he's been unfaithful in taking her dressed as his wife to this Sodom and Gomorrah. This basic
the Jezebels.
Yeah, the Jezebel.
Like the whorehouse.
Yeah, the whorehouse.
Where you can do whatever you please.
Which was the first time in the story where I was like, man, it's all set up as like bullshit, but when you're like, wow, this is hard, like, this is like the worst thing of at least the woman, Serena believed in all of this,
right? All
these other nothing, and it was, but she finds out, and then whenever she finds out, she goes to June's character, the handmaid, and is like, I'm gonna kill you unless you're pregnant. So I smuggled in this pregnancy test. Pee on this, and you better pray, otherwise I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah.
And then she's pregnant, and then the last episode is the stoning.
Okay.
And then, but she knows she's pregnant.
Yeah.
And then they take them all away.
Yeah.
And she's like, what did you do after everything you did for you? What did you do? And I was like, what? That line. Why did you? You know how horrible you are.
She doesn't.
Does she really? She doesn't get it?
It doesn't take until, like, this most recent season where she is like, I can't. She even still, though, is kind of like, I still think we did good. And it's still like, no, but you can't play both sides.
When she takes June to see her daughter and is like, act right, or is my kid safe? I'll keep your kid safe.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're just evil. Like, it's so evil. That was another reason why I didn't want to watch the show, is because when I looked it up on IMDb, I saw the cast list and how so many of them are still in episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I can't take a show where characters this terrible are still alive 5 seasons into a show.
I feel like the rest, I mean, you obviously get like side character stories and more of like how fucked up shit is, but also like how more of the rebellion is actually like coming. But I feel like the whole show is really just based off June trying to get her daughter. That's it. Period.
And I don't want to watch 5 seasons of it.
No, I don't blame you. It's a lot, and you want it to end now. Like, I wanted it to end probably like season 4.
I want to, like, I remember I was watching the show, and I can't remember, but the auntie woman character did something horrible, and I was like, I need to know when this character dies, because she doesn't seem important. Like the wife, Lydia. So when Serena, I thought, okay, this character is integral enough to where they would keep her around, and she's also evil enough. She could be an antagonist for this whole show. But Lydia clearly gonna die, right? She's gonna get murdered. And then I clicked on an episode in the latest season, and it's the description was, and Lydia is starting to believe that her treatment of the handmaids may have gone a little too far. And I was like, you're 5 seasons in, and that's just coming up?
Yeah. You get a lot of moments with her in flashbacks throughout the season where you're like seeing what she was like and how she kind of became who she was. But yeah, I want to hear about your kind of like breakdowns for some of these episodes and what kind of like you pulled out from those.
Out? Yeah. So I do have some points on that. Like I said, my first note was, what the fuck?
Yes.
Is this show?
I think if you didn't say what the fuck, we might have had some problems.
Yeah.
In our friendship.
I had never. Apparently, I was the only. I asked everyone I knew and had seen, And I was like, have you ever heard of this? And everyone was like, yeah, have you not? It's everywhere. It's very famous. How do you not know about this? And I'm like, I had no idea.
No, I mean, yeah.
So I had never heard of this book, never heard of this show, didn't know anything about it. And
I asked Ted specifically to kind of watch this first season because I know he was a youth minister. And so I just found it fascinating that, if he hasn't seen this, let's dig into that. And then obviously,
I was once a very devout Christian. I was a Southern Baptist, which echoes a lot of stuff that they talk about in this. So it was a lot of, I think, a lot of it was, I was like, ooh,
yeah,
I know that verse, a kind of, that strikes, I remember that. Yeah. Okay.
And I have a list of questions for Ted, but I want to kind of just hear firsthand what he picked from through these episodes and see how that unfolds with what his past was like.
So the first, this doesn't really factor into my past so much,
sure.
But this was something.
But I think things you pull from it will kind of show that.
I pulled this, so in our, in the first episode, we get exposed to the ritual.
Yes, which is horrifying.
It is a religious rape, and it is a full-on that was one of the most disturbing things I've seen on television. Is because they don't
to watch.
Yeah, they don't. That is one of the most interesting things about the show and how it's shot and how it's edited and portrayed. That there's no foreshadow. They just throw you in to what's happening. And
which makes you feel how they probably feel.
Exactly.
Like, this is just happening and there's no other choice, and
we get
that.
We get that with I'm bad with names, but the character who loses an eye and who's full on crazy. Yeah, Janine. How
she eventually loses it so badly that she
as opposed to, oh my god, I was like, as opposed to now where she's
well, she's kind of rebelling and pushing those boundaries, and I think they beat her down to be like, no, Lydia said if I was a good girl, and she kind of plays that, and you're like, oh fuck, they got to her.
Well, that comes up. That's kind of what I was talking about. Where they put her in, she goes into the Handmaid program, and she's like, "What are you guys?" She acts like a normal person in that situation, and then everyone's like,
"Don't."
She's like, "What are you guys talking about? Shut up!" And then Aunt Lydia just goes and tases her in the back of the neck, and then they take her away, and then she comes back eyeless and crazy, and she's like, and then they're like, "Shut the." And
that's her for a while.
Yeah.
Because she eventually has babies for commanders.
So she has one of the kids.
And then
in the
those
first
commanders
season.
obviously abuse their power, and they're she snaps at a point. She's like, "You told me if I sucked your dick, it would just be us, and you would leave your wife." And you're like, "Oh fuck."
Yeah.
And then the wives are like, "Oh fuck."
Yeah, that
the wives know their men are garbage.
Yeah.
Besides probably maybe 0.1% that are okay, that is too far. I'll just do what I'm told and nothing more, But yeah, Janine.
So Janine, her story ends in the first season where she attempts suicide.
Yes.
And then she doesn't die, which didn't make any sense to me.
She's still used.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean that she jumps off of a bridge into a frozen
they save her
lake,
right away.
and then they take her out, and she's in a coma, and I'm like, I don't think so, but okay.
Yeah.
But I wrote down that during this ceremony, the commander goes in and unlocks the chest on the mantle, pulls out the Bible, reads the verse, and then they do
to be fruitful.
Yeah,
whatever.
Then they do the horrible rape.
Yeah.
And what I wrote down was, this is reminiscent of 1800 slavery. Was they exposed Africans who were being brought over to Christianity and religion, and then brought them up on, but they weren't allowed to read or write like women, and they kept Bibles under lock and key. You weren't allowed to give any sort of like religious material to slaves, so it was all kept under wraps because they were picking and choosing the verses and the points to teach to them to, promote subjugation, which is exactly what they're doing in this. And the only person who's allowed access to it under lock and key is the commander, one of the patriarch, of the society. And I was like,
it's just so disgusting.
Yeah, I don't have.
I mean, you can pick and choose anything from anywhere and be like, let's see if you don't get the rest of.
Yeah, if you don't have the rest of the context.
Yeah.
There's a movie that I love called Book of Eli, where it's Denzel Washington.
I feel like I've seen that.
It's a great movie, but it's a post-apocalyptic movie. But the whole point is that this Denzel Washington character has the last Bible in this like post-apocalyptia, and the antagonist wants to do this pretty much where he knows that the words of that book are so powerful in the way they're written that he could subjugate everyone by just picking what works.
Yeah.
So
that's
he's
what people do nowadays.
Yeah, and that's that's something that we see now where they pick and choose.
It's like, read the rest of that verse and tell me what the fuck it says.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not as up on it as I used to be in the years following me leaving organized religion and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I remember being the progressive of my church, of being like, well, we don't want homosexuals here, and we don't want these people, and then me being like, well, that's not really for us to do,
right?
And I want everyone to understand, if me at the time, different person,
sure.
But as a religious person, I was said, we as humans, we don't deny anyone.
Right, everyone's supposed to be welcome.
Yeah, we are here to teach and to spread the word. It's up to them to become saved. All we are is meant to is preach and spread. We should be taking in everyone to save everyone. We shouldn't be denying anyone. If you're denying these people coming in, then you're denying them the chance for salvation. And then them being like, look at the kid over here. All right. Technically, yes, but
don't listen to him.
Yeah, like, we don't want to sit with them. We'll get them a pew by themselves. And then,
Yeah.
But, so I don't have experience with this, but this was the first scene where, like, they, among the other messed up stuff, where they show it, and I was like, oh, this isn't just like some kind of new twist on Christianity. This is taking the worst parts of the history with Christianity and going, okay, we're going to put this forward, and we're going to use, it was like the greatest hits of horribleness. And I have this, so I have this later in my notes, but it's something I did want to bring up. This is on a later episode. I think it's episode 3, but I don't want to sit here and read while we're doing this. But after her friend who tells her that about the rebellion gets taken away.
The black woman, right?
No, she's a lesbian, and we were talking about her before. I think it's Ingrid.
Something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Her shopping mate, because they make all of the handmaidens go in pairs to spy on each other, and
I'm sorry, but if I get what's all survival, but I feel like as a woman, like, let alone like the wives and like the Marthas, just trying to survive, but like your own handmaid snitching on you, that's just like that. It's just even more fucked up, because it's supposed to be like, wow, we're supposed to be in this together, and you're not.
But I think that they do a great job of explaining how that makes sense with this character, is that when she gets replaced, it's by the woman who comes up and she goes, hey, don't fuck with this and don't fuck with me. But like, I lived in the city. I know who you are. I remember you used to come in with that guy and you had your little girl and everything was all fine. You know where I was? I was out back sucking dick for my next fix, living in a dumpster.
So this was like good life for her.
Yeah, so she was like, I'm living the good life. Yeah. Don't fuck it up for me.
Yeah, which is wild.
But I have known of people where that's where religion was their escape like that.
I feel it's like a lot of people's, I don't want to say crutch because that sounds rude, but
that's,
but you know, like it was their saving grace, if you want to call it that, you know?
Yeah, like the 12-step program, famous program, you know, getting people off of addiction. One of those steps is finding, you know, power in Christ. And I don't know if that's still the case, but I
think it is, but there's a lot of groups who are trying to
get
not
away from
involve
that.
it, so it can be like a safe space for everyone, even if they don't, you know, they're not forced into like, you have to believe in this to be sober, you know?
And I do want to impress, I don't think religion is a bad thing. I think it's about how you look at religion and your experiences with religion. I have had very good experiences and very bad experiences, so I think I can see both sides of it and see the benefits. Whereas I have a friend who I was actually talking to right before you came over, and I was telling you about the show, and they were like, if you got me on that show, I'm not going to tell their story, but they have had horrifying, like almost this level in real life.
Yeah. People experiences.
The things in this show happen.
For sure.
And they have happened to a person who I know very well, and
it's fucked.
It's really fucked up, and I've had debates with them where I go, yeah, that's horrible, and those people are horrible, but there is a good side to religion. And I think that this character is kind of in a... It's supposed to be a description of that, of like, hey, I was literally dying on the streets, and this society isn't perfect, but it saved me.
Yeah.
And I think for some, if not a lot of people, that's what religion can be, where there might be, I'm sure there are people out there who are saying horrible things that they may not necessarily believe, but they go, well, you know, if I look at where I was before I joined this church to now, I would be dead without them, so I'm going to die for them.
Sure.
And
I think having a belief in something is fine and healthy for some, but I think the actual religion is not healthy.
Yeah, that's where, you know,
when it becomes that organized religion,
that is
the
kind
belief,
of my...
it seems that's where it goes off the bridge.
That was my biggest connection to personally with this show. That was like, that cut me deep. Was this is a extreme case of the over-organization of religion and the overpopulation of the bureaucracy of it.
Yeah.
And we mentioned this before. We talked about this a little bit before, about how, you know, whenever we later realized that the handmaidens, even though they're spoken of as these like honored creatures that are they're like practically worshipped as holy symbols in the church, it's all on a front. They are a commodity, and they're a resource that this group was like, we have to collect as much of this resource as we can because it's the most precious resource in the world now. Is that sentiment hit me like a ton of bricks, because that was why I left religion.
Okay.
Was because whenever I was when I used to be a youth minister, I taught alongside. I was a assistant minister to this woman who was a very wonderful lady, but she left. She moved away with her husband. I don't remember exactly. I think they like bought some land then, but they left and they couldn't find another one, and they went, you're turning 18 legally. You can now be the minister, so we're going to set you up, and you're going to teach now.
Okay.
So I started teaching by myself. I taught kids, and But then I had to go to my first budget meeting of a church, and I thought, no one told me it was a budget meeting. No one told me about what any of it was. They just said, oh, the elders and everyone's getting together and we're going to discuss, the forward plans of ministry. So I was like, okay. So I went in, and I thought it was like a progress report. I was like, all right, this is what I'm teaching the kids. This is what I'm going to be going into. I was like, here's my lesson plan, pretty much. And then one of the older guys, the elders of the church, which are like hit with the commanders of like the people running the business, went, that's all well and good. How much money do you think you're going to bring in? And I was like, and I said, excuse me? And he said, well, the youth ministries need to bring in this much money. We had the bake sale that brought in this much money. We had the fundraiser for concert that brought in this much money. All stuff that I was aware of and participated in. I didn't understand that they were like, these kids, and then this guy was like, those kids pull in a lot of money for this church. We need to make sure that doesn't stop. And it blew my mind that I never thought that someone was out in this church thinking of these kids as a money-making commodity.
Yeah.
And that these children were like these handmaidens where they were just a resource to bring in money. And it disgusted me to my core. And I just, I like stopped talking, and I was like, and I said, I wasn't aware of this. I'll have to look into it. And then I left, and a friend of mine, a neighbor, he's the one who started taking me to that church after we had moved towns. He said, hey, he asked me, is everything okay? He's a much older guy and one of the elders of the church. And he said, hey, is everything okay? And I went, no, I don't think so. I didn't know that this was part of it. I didn't know that this was, I'm not trying to name names, but I guess it doesn't. If I say just first names, we'll call him Paul.
Sure,
it's a Bible name. But like, I don't like what Paul said about this, and he goes, and he basically said, yeah, Paul's an asshole, but that's part of it. It's not something that we like the general public to see, but it's an aspect of any church, because at the end of the day, they have bills to pay, and
their own pockets to.
That's the thing, is that was his point of view. Said we have, we have to keep the lights on, and I went, okay, I guess that I understand. I don't like it, and he basically was like, every church needs one of those guys, a hard ass, the business, like, who's not there other than to keep things running smoothly on a monetary sense. And then I go and then I have to deal with him again. And that's when I learned about how people are like paid in church. Because I always thought it was, pastors like getting a little, getting something. And then that's it. And everything's volunteers' time. And everything that you tithe is all put towards the church. And not the case. It's a business, and it's paying more people money, putting more money in, more, and
because everything's like a fucking tax write-off.
Exactly, and a lot of them are employed, and the more I looked into this, the more I
turned off.
Yeah, and I not just turned off, but fell hard, because I was extremely religious growing up, and I stayed that way, and this was a blow to the very fabric of my being.
Yeah,
that this pillar of my life is not what I thought it was.
Yeah.
I knew that there was shitty Christians out there and shitty religions. Like, I had heard stories about, the assholes who were protesting soldiers' graves.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, those are the wrong kind of people. Those people are using words in a book to just propagate hate. And I never...
part of that.
Yeah, I never cared for that. I never approved of it, and I always just thought, Yeah, and anything, there's going to be people who
Yeah.
take advantage and use it
The
to,
bad apple.
yeah, who they use good to justify bad.
Yeah.
But then when I learned that, oh no, this is a foundation that is always going to be tainted because it's based.
It's broken system.
Yeah, it's all based on the building and greed of people who want, just something better,
Right.
and taking advantage of people. So all of that kind of just knocked me all the way down.
Yeah.
So seeing that in this show,
Right.
as I'm a guy, so when it comes to women's reproductive rights or the bond of a mother and her children or any of this stuff, I don't have a lot of touchstones for that.
Yeah.
I didn't have a mom, so I don't even have like that
Yeah.
of.
I'm not laughing because it's funny.
No, it's just like,
it's like, fuck.
if you want me to connect with this, I can connect with the horribleness of it and like speaking as to the satire of the society. But wanting me to like really connect with them, I don't have a lot of to like put myself in with these characters, because
I mean, that's probably a good thing that you don't feel connected in a sense to like the bad of it, but you can empathize enough with being self-aware of like, no, I'm not a woman or a mother, or know what it's like to have that bond even as a kid, but this is still fucked.
Yeah, and it is.
And that should, no matter what you believe in, that those things happening should never be justified in that way, ever.
It amazes me in the show every time they say like the horribleness is going on, because they yell it in a way where they're like, this is horrible, and I'm like, of course it's horrible. How do they, even in this world, how are they pretending it's not?
Yeah.
Serena's character, how is she?
She's just brainwashed.
How in her mind is she look at anything and go,
this is worth it, or okay?
Exactly. I remember where in the episode where the Mexican diplomat comes in and she talks about reading Serena's book, and she says, "Did you ever think that you would play such a pivotal role in a society where no one can read your book again?" And she was like,
Yeah, she had no answer.
Yeah, and it was like,
because I don't think it shows in season 1, but as it goes on, she wants more power because she knows she wrote that
they
book.
touch on that a bit.
So
you can
she
tell
tries to do that, and like tries to get the wives rallied up and like, no, we should do this because we're the wives. We should have a say in what goes on. And all the wives are like, I can't. Like, they back out. Serena goes and reads from the fucking Bible, and Fred cuts her pinky off. And he was like, it could have been fucking worse, but you will never do no shit like that. And I think that's when she finally realized, oh, I fucked up.
Yeah, you dug my own grave real deep in this one. There's so much in this show to dissect of like horror, but not horror in a way that I'm used to.
No, yeah.
Of horror in a much realer sense.
It's not the boogeyman who jumps from under the bed because it's dark and you're like, oh, fuck, that got me. It's like, oh, it's like psychologically horrible.
Exactly. And it's also, it's horror by twisting something that I know.
Yeah.
And making it real in a sense where there's...
Well, I think that was the opposite for me, how you said, like, it's hard for me to connect because I'm not a woman or a mother. In my sense of it, it's like, I'm only a woman. I'm not a mother, but, like, religion was something that, like, my mom had, but it was never pushed past that as a kid. So, like, watching it, I have no connection with the religion. I'm just sitting there thinking, who the fuck can believe this? Because this is fucking wild, you know?
Yeah, and...
So, like, two different perspectives, but they still kind of come to the same conclusion.
Yeah, and especially, and amazingly, there's a program that's dialed into our dichotomy of experience. But I because Old Testament especially, there's a lot of wrath of man, wrath of God.
Okay.
And that's kind of the whole shtick, is that
Got it.
Old Testament is angry God, and the New Testament is happy God. If you want to boil it down, it's obviously it's a lot more than that, but that's pretty much the gist. Is Old Testament God is the vengeful, wrathful, do what I say, you get in line, or else. And the New Testament is, it's a lot more of the Jesus of forgiveness, turning the other cheek, moving on, in the story. So there's a scene where we talked about it before, where one-eyed lady, Janice, when her commander goes to a tribunal to answer for
his crimes.
Yeah, his crimes of touching the handmaiden outside of the ceremony.
Having this secret relationship with her so he could get his rocks off the way he wanted.
Exactly. That's the thing.
Took his fucking hand.
They cut his hand off, but what horrified me was that they show it, and it's not in your head. And whenever you, especially if you like me, who grew up with religion, and you know that these are parts of the Bible.
Yeah.
It's all like a story in your head of like you putting a hand on a rock and taking a thing and just cutting it and going, okay, here you go. But in this, they make it so real because it's a surgical amputation where they show him going under. They show, them marking the hand. And I don't know if you know this, that's how amputations are actually done.
I'm sure.
They cut down and then pull the skin back, cut the bone so it's shut. And that's how amputation been done since like the Civil War. And then they show that for real. I was like, this is like one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen. Because it took something in my head that was just like a story, or it was like / horror, and made it real. And how he comes out of it like, here was I did this crime, and now I have this biblical Old Testament thing of you get hit of the, oh damn.
Well, then he's also like in a sense like shamed even by his own people, but like still able to kind of hold a position, and then that shame on his wife when all those other ladies were like, oh, did you hear what her husband did? So it's still that like game of like who's better than who.
Exactly. And you kind of, that's where you learn that Fred, June's commander, is like a real dirtbag. Is because when they at the tribunal, he literally is like, we all do it. It's not that big a deal. And then the one character, he's the only character who I'm interested, who I would be really.
The guy with the white beard.
Yes.
Yeah.
The like pseudo.
He's the
leader.
Architect of the whole place.
Yeah.
Like he built it.
He's the only person who I'm interested in seeing because he seems the most like intelligent in how he's, like you saying, architect and creating the society, but also he seems to believe it. Whether it's an act or not, in the first season, Fred is like, it's not a big deal, just keep him going, and then he's like, no, it is a big deal.
Like, these are the fucking laws, and you broke it.
And he broke it, so we're gonna do this right now. And also, his wife asked for the harshest punishment we could do.
She's embarrassed. She'll be shamed forever.
Exactly. And I was like,
she's like, yeah, do to him what I feel like you did to me. That guy has a back and forth. You love him, you hate him, because he stays in that power position. And his wife is crazy. You'll never like see her because she didn't realize that's what that world was gonna be. So she pretty much loses it, and she's like medicated, and he never has sex with a handmaid. They never have a baby, and he's kind of like helps the rebellion, but he also plays the side of Gilead. So he won't do everything for the rebellion, because he's like, if it's gonna be taken down, it's gonna be taken down from the inside. So you kind of like love and hate him. You're like, what the fuck's his deal? But then you're like, oh, she did do that. Because the girl who got her clit taken off, she gets sent to him. And then she's like, oh, okay, this is not going to be what I thought it was. So I think that helps her character in some way because she gets sent there, but he's not going to do to her what she thinks is going to happen.
Yeah. They also show like he's also kind of like a spy master where he's you know, he's got all the eye people and the undercover that you learn that Nick is one of. Which, oh man, that kind of stuff that freaked me out because they show it all as this whole religious rise up and all this thing, but it kind of happened. When you look at like the insurrection of these people who were so hopped up on like God and Trump, but they got they got dressed up and then went into the Capitol building. But you're like, if they were actually organized and equipped, this is what those kind of people could do.
Yeah, exactly.
And if there was like a centralized, if they had an internal central government that was dictating to these people, like the commanders of Gilead did, this shit could have happened like a few years ago.
And literally. That's so fucking scary.
Right? Which, when this show came out, like predicting the future, they just didn't realize that there was going to be there was no control and it was just idiots. But, yeah, right? You're like, oh.
So did anything else kind of, before I like ask you all these questions of like start to finish of your experience, like what else throughout these episodes kind of got you?
God, I can't believe it. To put in context about how insane this show is, episode 3 is where Ulfga is the character who loses her, who's gay, and that's episode 3 where Ulfga gets taken and then they remove her clit surgically.
Yeah.
And they also
that's only episode 3, which is crazy.
And they do the most nonchalant execution ever, where they sentence them. They're not allowed to speak. They're not allowed to defend themselves or do anything. They come in, everyone looks together and go, oh, they're guilty. And then they put them in a van. They drive a little bit. They take the Martha out of the van, put her on a crane, hang her, and then just drive away. And you just see her hang in the background. And I was like, Jesus Christ, it's nothing, it's just nothing.
They're like, oh, you clearly aren't worth anything, so that's how you're treated.
I feel like it's worth knowing just to talk about the end of the show.
Yeah.
But in the beginning of the show, how the first scene that we see of all the handmaids collecting together is the man who is sentenced for raping a handmaid, and
they beat him.
Yeah, they beat him to death. They have, as apparently, it's not expressly said, but it seems to be shown that if a crime is committed against a handmaid, the punishment is doled out by the handmaids. So
they just take their fucking anger out of them. Like, you fucking did this to one of us, and just fucking... And you can see, like, with June, how that clicks, and even though she's kind of like, fuck, this is kind of wrong, you get into that because you're like conditioned, but then you're like, I need to take my feelings out somewhere.
Is you see, it's part of the manipulation of like, we're gonna push these women to the brink, but we're gonna give them they need an escape. This is the escape, and you're like, man, this is like picture perfect manipulation and like societal molding in the worst way possible.
Yeah,
I feel like this show could have been like 4 episodes smaller.
Really?
Because there's some stuff it's crazy, but in the context of like the show, episode 4, I have this is where June like gets put into her room, and it's before she starts like doing stuff with the commander. It's like the start,
like the punish. She's in there by herself. She's like isolated. She's losing it.
Yeah, she's losing it, and then this is where Fred starts like pursuing a actual romantic relationship, and we find out that he had done this with a previous handmaid, and that they
killed herself.
They would kill herself, and they just kind of hushed it up. But as far as like, I guess it's all in the book, and they wanted to be so true to the book. But I was like, in the rest of the show, don't know how important some of this is, because that whole episode, is just her like trying to push Fred whenever she's allowed to go out, to be like, what the fuck's going on? Which is something that I don't understand about her character, at least how she's portrayed in the show, is that she's constantly, quite literally getting hit in the face with how everyone's out to get her. Everything is, they're spies. She knows one of them personally, and it just keeps coming up. But maybe it's just like they're trying to express her pure side of rebellion, but how she keeps pushing the envelope,
for sure,
and like pushing the other characters. And
I think that's what it is. Like, some people will just not fold.
Yeah. And she's one of those people, and I'm like, why are you talking to the commander about this stuff? Like, you're just gonna get murdered. Go, like, kill him or something. I don't know. And just the hardest thing about watching the show is you're like, man, just kill all these.
I think if it wasn't for her daughter, which is probably why they, throughout the seasons, keep dragging some of those things on, because it's really just her, I have to save my kid. Like, I could do all this crazy shit, kill a commander.
I forget about the daughter.
Off my shit, but like, I can't leave her behind. So I think that's why a lot of those episodes go into,
which again, that
filler of her mental state, but in the end, Hannah is the only thing that matters to her.
Which again, hard for me to,
right.
I ain't got no mom. My mom certainly didn't have those thoughts towards me, so
fuck.
When they're like, no, I'm gonna deal with all this to get my kid back, I'm like, really? Is that what a normal person would do?
Yeah.
I don't know. So, I do love, so I have this on here, or it's a quote from the show where we get a kind of an insight into the society, where Fred, the commander, says, we wanted to make the world better, but better for some always means worse for others.
Exactly.
And
period.
I think that describes in its entirety why I think as a people we could never and should never strive for something like this, a unified society.
Yeah, for sure.
Because
it will always be worse for more.
Yeah, someone will always come out on the bottom.
Yep.
Which is going to be the case most all the time, but at least in a encompassing and accepting society, you can go, okay, you may be low over here, but over here in your space, you're high.
Yeah.
And it kind of gives you a more
balance.
Yeah, balanced life and balanced society. But I thought that line was very powerful, and it really kind of hit where I was like, oh, and I started thinking about my religion and other religions that I've learned about, and just, yeah, that's true. Or just any society, like if any one place just took over the world,
it'd be not good.
Who would be hurting because?
Exactly.
And again, this doesn't really tie into my experience with religion, but I do think it is a very powerful thing that
definitely.
You should realize. If you're out there and you're watching the show and you go, no, if everyone was just this,
it'd all be fine.
It'd be fine, and you really think about it and go, who wouldn't be?
Yeah. And
even if it's just someone who goes, if let's say everyone be Buddhist, or some just a free spirit acceptance. You're like, okay, well then the person who's really competitive and who finds joy in wanting to be the best and striving to improve themselves in context with others, like, what are they gonna do? Just gonna hate themselves now, and because there's nothing to do for, there's no strive for life for that person. And so it's, I don't know, I think it's something that just hit me rather big. I have also, they do something really good. We're seeing the outside world, where they start showing Canada and showing the other people's views towards
They hate Gilead.
what's going on in America, and they're like, shit, those people are what? That's crazy.
Yeah, like let's be like if you can escape, you can find sanction here.
I actually do have that of in the husband episode, they show how and also in the, I think it's the last episode, where her friend, who is later we find out is she becomes a Jezebel, and then she escapes.
Black girl, right?
Yeah, the black girl.
I think her name's. I thought it was like Sasha or something, or like that was her Jezebel name or something like that.
Something like that. Is whenever she escapes and makes it to Canada, and they're like, all right, here's your food, here's your phone, here's money, here's cab fare, here's everything. And I'm like, wow.
But even for her, it was too shocking.
Yeah.
Like that change when you're that imprisoned or like tortured, going back to something like that is also overstimulating, overwhelming, and you almost can't you can't go back to normal after experiencing torture like that.
Yeah.
So it's still like, fuck, how am I gonna readjust to being normal in a normal society?
I was amazed. I was like, wow, the refugee system in Canada, if it's anything like this, that's awesome.
I mean, people joke nowadays of like, where do I go if like I need to flee the US? And people say like Canada, Mexico, or like, you know, obviously places overseas.
Yeah.
But it's just like, those are the two.
I got a good in Vietnam. You know?
It's just getting over there.
Yeah.
At least Canada, you can fucking swim over that bitch or something.
Right? I got a van. I'll take a road trip, drive right on through, you know? But we mentioned this before, you know, I'm just kind of like hitting on my notes a little bit as we're wrapping up more of the in-depth of the show discussion here of one of the later episodes. I have it in 10 of Yvonne's character,
Serena.
Yeah, Serena. I remember. I was gonna say, getting hit by her own laws, and that's where she goes to her husband and she's like, "Hey, I helped write these laws. I can help. We can, you know,
right? Like, let me be involved.
Yeah, let me be involved. I help you. You're in the position of power you are because of you were married to me. I can help you deal with the delegates and, you know, figure out something to do." And then he goes, "No, keep the house in order. This is, you know,
Period. That's it.
He's like, you put me in charge, and I'm in charge.
You got that power now." And
apparently,
I don't care what nobody says, love or marriage. That shit don't matter when you give someone that much power. They're gonna use it.
Which apparently gets even crazier because
she
got her fucking finger cut off. Which, like,
I mean, she ends up like fleeing Gilead, having a baby, and all that shit. Like, it gets wild.
Honestly,
But there's people out there even worse than Fred. Like, they show other commanders in like other faraway like states or whatever, and like it shows like June and them going to visit one of them, and they all kind of wear like these masks with their handmaids' red outfits, like when people come. And he was like, "Wow, your handmaids are so well behaved, and like they're not speaking back to you or like nothing." And he's like, "Oh yeah, that's because we either cut their tongues out or sew their mouths." So like people are even like pushing that, and it's just like, oh fuck, you know, like it's not even as bad as like what he was doing. And that's when you're like, okay, this shit's really off the rails, and this rebellion's like trying to like take down, but it's so hard, you know. Yeah, that shit gets wild.
You know, in my head, I'm like, is the suspension of disbelief that if that would happen, that's so crazy that you think that someone would just turn and go, "No, I'm dead anyway." Stab. I'm gonna kill as many as I can and go down.
Yeah.
But then the terrifying thing, when you realize that's not how people work, and that when it comes to life, you know, it doesn't matter what you have to deal with. A lot of people especially pushed slow, like how they describe in the show, will put up with anything if it means even a monicum of life.
Yeah.
Which I think is freaky.
It is.
Because you're like, oh, that's so horrifying. Why aren't they just turning and going crazy and killing everybody? It's like, well...
Because it was slowly introduced till you got used to it, and then it was not a choice anymore.
And it's conditioning.
Yes.
It's not, you know...
It wasn't just overnight.
Exactly. I don't know, it's not an ice shock. It's not like a shock and awe of here it is now. It's we had a slow burn where
we'll get you eventually, but here's where we'll start.
I remember when they show that in the flashbacks where all right, all the women are fired, there's nothing I can do. Bunch of armed gunmen, everyone's gotta leave. Everyone's like, what the hell? And then they're still like living and they're like, hey, I need to go get my prescription filled, and you said, you need to sign this, and he's like, and I can't have access to my money. And he's like, oh, well, if I go get I can go sign your bank paperwork, and we'll just put the money in my account. And they're like, and friend who was her friend, we should say that she was her friend before that. She was a police officer. And then, but she doesn't have anyone, so all of her money gets taken away. Which, I did want to say this because I didn't like this in the show, where, so she's her friend from before. She's in it throughout. God, I wish I wrote down that character's name. She's in The Walking Dead. Really great actor. But in the end, where she escapes to Canada, maybe there's like deleted scenes or there's something I don't. But she only has like one scene. Moira.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right, Moira. So Moira only has one scene with June's husband, and it's like them drunk, hanging out, like after all the women lose their jobs and their money.
Yeah.
But it's before things get real crazy, and she's basically like, fucking men cause a bunch of trouble. Why don't you go make, and she just says like some stereotypical shit, and then he goes like, aha, okay, I'm not really a part of that. And then she's like, I don't give a shit. And they have like this small tiff. That's it. It's like a little thing. And then she's like drunk, and he's like, in the same scene, like, oh, don't go home. You're drunk. Why don't you stay here? You can sleep here. She's like, nah, I'm just gonna walk. Whatever. So that's the only scene they're in. So, but in the last, like their last scene, she escapes to Canada. He shows up at the refugee center, and Luke, and then Moira's. She says before she makes a big deal about pointing out she doesn't have any family, she doesn't have anybody who's here in Canada, and then he shows up, and she's like, "What are you doing here?" And they do this setup where, like, it's like they hated each other, and then he's like, "Whoa, we're family," and then she breaks down and crying and hugging and stuff. That reaction, no way earned from what they showed me in this show, where it's like one scene where like they had
I think she thought he either died, or in the sense of like, you let Hannah take them, or that he probably got like remarried there and just like was living life there. Those are my only things, but.
That maybe. All I could think
maybe
was
just
like
the shock of it.
Yeah, but all I could think was all you set up was that
that's true.
She thinks that the only person who loves her is June, who's still trapped, and that this guy doesn't like her. And then he's like, "We're family," and then it breaks her down.
Yeah.
But I'm like, you guys had one. I've had worse fights with so many friends of mine of people who I love, who I'd be like. Yeah, of course, it makes total sense. I'm like, you guys should have been, if that's what you wanted me to feel, you guys should have been way more at each other's throats.
We get a lot more of them later on, because then when she gets a little more rehabilitated to life, both of them are like, okay, we need to find June or something like, or she starts working at like the borders as like kind of rescue or help people that are hurt that are trying, shit like that. So you get more of them, but again, June is the main character, so that's who matters in this whole segment of 6 seasons. Which I don't know if you know, that actress who plays June, she's a Scientologist.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Which, when a lot of people found that out, they, like, online, a lot of people were like, how dare you play a character like this and kind of believe in this, like, hardcore religion? You know, in a sense, like, playing, like, the opposite character. Or also people were like, oh, you're a Scientologist, no wonder you played, like, that deranged character when she kind of, like, starts getting to that point. Or I think they even won an award for the cinematography of, like, zooming into her eyes and just, like, how kind of, like, that feeling was given just the way they shot it. But yeah, I always find it interesting that back in my head, I'm like, she's a Scientologist. Yeah. Out of all of the things you can be.
She real crazy. The only other thing I knew that actress from was Mad Men.
Yep.
And which I've only ever seen like very little of.
Okay.
But after watching that show in the first season of this show, I don't know the actress' real name, but I don't know.
I don't remember it, but I used to.
Why people like her so much. I do not think that she's very good.
No?
Even in this, I don't think she's very good. I think the story being told is fantastic. Yeah. I think everyone around her, fantastic. I remember watching her in Mad Men and going, it's fine, but I guess I know later in the show her character becomes a lot more important. Yeah. But I couldn't really get into it. But watching this, where it's like just her, and there's so much focus, and there's so much drama and emotion, all this stuff, I'm like, I must be crazy, because I know this, after doing research, I know that this woman is incredibly famous and very awarded and all this stuff, and I just don't see it, and I'm like, the performances around her are so much better that I'm like, I just don't get it. Yeah. But I don't know, I wanted to ask, like, is that a me or do you think that even...
I mean, I think she's a good actress. I feel like besides Handmaid's Tale, a little bit of Mad Men, I thought she was good, like, in The Invisible Man. Or, like, yeah, I think she's a fine actress. But again, I think because I've watched all of these seasons, I'm just kind of invested in, like, what her character is going to do, that I really don't even pay attention to all that.
Last note I have on the show is something that we've touched on before, but I think it does. This is like the big hitter of the whole. It might as well be the freaking thesis of the show or the book. Is in the way the show ends, is one-eyed
Janice.
Oh my god! So Janice is she wakes up from her coma, and she's sentenced to death by Aunt Lydia, who again, amazing performance, where like you really are feeling how much she cares, even though she's batshit.
But she cares for her.
Loves these women as her children.
Yeah.
And she has to sentence this one to death, who actually, for all of her instability, actually is one of the few who believe what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's choking her up, and then they put all the stones out, and then she's sentenced to stoning.
And they don't.
And then, which is also the replacement Ulfga, who was fully bought in, is like, I don't want to do this, and then the guy beats her like almost to death immediately. And then June picks up a stone and does, classic Bible proverb of let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And that's the whole all what's shown is that everyone picks up a stone, they have their stone, and she drops it.
We're not doing
this. And it's, it's a mix of this act of rebellion while also this one of the most famous parables of the Bible.
Yeah.
No, we're all.
Sinners.
If we had been through what she's been through, we probably would have done the same
Exactly.
thing. And we are not going to kill one of our own.
Exactly.
No matter what. And
they have to stand together.
You know, I think that is, I don't know. It one of the most blatant kind of parallels of the. You know, now that I'm discussing it, I think that is a bigger point of that is New Testament. So that is Jesus. That's New Testament of going, no, don't do this. Don't kill. You have no right to hurt someone or to punish someone based on their sin. As people, that's out of your hands. And then he says, you know, that he was without sin. So maybe that's what this is trying to describe, is this Old Testament society is now being greatly affected by New Testament.
Yeah, I could definitely see that now that you kind of explain it in that way for sure.
I don't know, but that's what's popped in my head.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
You're talking about the dynamic point.
And on that note, you guys are going to have to stay tuned for part 2 of Ted's experience as a youth minister.
Please check us out on socials. Please check us out on Patreon. As always, if you're listening, I love you.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.